Hello everyone, Crow here from Vilebranch, only on titansleague.org. I'm here today to discuss some of the design philosophies around my level 19 private server. I'm also here to try to recruit some developers. The things I'm currently looking for are C++ and LUA scripters in order to create dungeons, raids, and quest events. I'm also looking for people to do database entry who are fluent in SQL. I'm also looking for some creative content design to help for my think tank. And so people who don't even have programming skills can apply for that position and help design spells and abilities for custom classes or existing classes in order to more fully flesh out the class fantasy or niche of that specialization. This is also helpful for things like item design. So some of the features on this server, as a lot of people have seen from previous videos, are the talent design for level 19 and spell design. The spell philosophy behind it is to have a low-level private server that has spells that don't take up 20 bars. Simply put, it's to make it a bit more streamlined. Think Dota or League of Legends, where a majority of your stuff comes from only a handful of abilities and passives. I feel personally that this is a lot better for players who don't want to be overwhelmed, and maybe it's just a boomer in me, but I prefer it, to be honest. So I've always been gravitating to low-level private servers, and honestly it amazes me that there aren't a whole lot of Twink servers right now out. The talent design is also a bit streamlined in the way that you become more powerful with your class fantasy the more points you sink into it. But there's not a whole lot of 5-pointers or things that demand you put a bunch of points into. For some trees, there might not be a whole lot of choice at all. However, the choices you are making are more utilitarian. So the abilities that make you deal damage, for instance, you could pick those, and they're considered soft mandatory because everyone is going to try to pick those. Everyone wants to do more damage, obviously. But the things that are more utilitarian, you'll find you'll wind up having to make a choice. Additionally, speaking of utilitarian talents, a lot of CC can be problematic on lower level servers, and in general in PvP. You want to be able to play the game after all. And so crowd control by itself isn't as strong as it normally is. However, if it's part of the class fantasy or the way that the playstyle is for your specialization, you'll have access to talents that increase the duration or reduce the cooldown or increase the potency of crowd control. This is because while crowd control should not be in every single scenario for like 20-second sunlock windows, you should still have access to it as part of the class fantasy. I mean, who wouldn't want Mage to have counterspell, for instance? It's absolutely iconic. It's also important for the playstyle because mages naturally are a lot more squishy. There are also some custom spells that are added into the game that don't normally exist. One example is the elemental shaman spell, Electrocute, which attempts to finish off an enemy with nature damage. Think of Hammer of Wrath for paladins. You also find that there are quite a few custom talents and abilities on the end of each tree, or modified in ways that aren't normally in the game. You'll also find Shaman is one of the few classes that has 4 talent tabs instead of 3. This is because I have found personally that a Shaman tank design cannot be fully encapsulated in purely the enhancement tree. In fact, I think the enhancement tree has a class fantasy that mostly involves using the elements to empower your weapons, kind of like a barbarian, and to deal damage. Pure and simply. Even though once upon a time it did have shield specialization, I think that a lot of that was gutted in the initial work in vanilla. Rather, I moved it to its own tab with its own class fantasy, which, unlike the other trees, involves the spiritual connection to the ancestors and elements aspect, which is a lot more emboldened. And you'll wind up using your connection to those things to protect yourself and others. Things like being able to dodge, block, and parry while casting spells. I've done this because I went to the Warden Spec Discord that a bunch of tanking shamans have put together, and I asked them questions. And one of the most important aspects of this class fantasy is snapping aggro from a range. And so maybe mid-combat you'll want to throw out a chain lightning to make another group pull, or throw out a quick lightning bolt. Additionally, you can empower your shocks and have access to a unique elemental shield called Magma Shield, as displayed in a prior video. This shield will deal a little bit of damage in a cone to enemies in front of you, and increase some of your tanking stats, which are further increased with Molten Protection, which builds up as you're hit with the shield. And you can expend this Molten Protection by using Obsidian Armor, which will grant you a minor absorption shield, but you can no longer proc your Molten Protection or Magma Shield while in it. You'll also have access to things like Stone Mother's Boon, which causes your AoE ability, Rocky Reprisal, to regenerate some mana for you and increase your combat mana regen. Moving on to some other classes, you could check out on the login screen here. I have a couple of custom classes that are on the list of things to do, and once they're fully fleshed out, will be released after the probably quite a bit of time after the first initial launch. Death Knights have a bunch of custom talents and abilities, but some of the major changes are that Blood is the tanking spec here, and that Frost is more of a DPS spec. Additionally, their global cooldown is increased to 2.5 up from 1.5 seconds. And this is because normally the biggest gripe that you'll have in the level 19 atmosphere for Death Knights is that they're very strong and can do a lot in a very short window. They also have a lot of CC, and as a result, we only added a couple of CC spells, and abilities like Chains of Ice reduced to a 40% movement speed snare, rather than the really strong fading to really weak slow. Let's see, also, classes like Rogues and Mages have reductions to their initial crowd control in the form of Chief Shot and Kidney Shot. However, you have the ability to put talent points into it to extend the duration or reduce the cooldown of certain abilities that are iconic to the tree. So not every fight will wind up with you being blown away. Additionally, a point to make is that your PvP gear, in order to make fights longer, will have a lot more stamina and armor and magical resistances to make sure those fights go on a lot longer. You don't want to be blown away in 1 second after all. That would be boring. Instead, what you'll do is you'll earn your PvP gear and be able to take a lot more hits, but there's not as many offensive stats as well. On the PvE items, however, you'll find quite a wide variety of stats, and the offensive stats are mostly untouched. So how do you get PvP gear, one might ask? After all, most Twink players are very keen on the idea of PvP. Well, here's how. You open up your Battleground tab, and once you play a Battleground, you will be given Battleground Marks of Honor. These marks can be turned in to your Quartermaster in your faction hub, and you'll be able to get a little bit of reputation with the Quartermaster, a little bit of money, and some experience points. Once you've reached certain thresholds, you'll be able to pick up some of the PvP gear. This is considered to be item level 20 and is one of the higher tiers of item scaling. Once you get up to Exalted, however, the items go from rare, or uncommon to rare, and as such, the stats on these items actually increase quite a fair bit. You'll notice things like your stamina go up, but your offensive stats like your agility and your attack power do not. You also have access to improved bandages and trinkets and such. Your PvE gear, however, is primarily created through professions and doing dungeons. Professions, starting out immediately, will craft gear that you can actually use. This gear is slightly stronger than the starting gear, which is item level 14, starting at item level 16. And that goes from 1 to 75. Once you get 75, the gear you make will have 16 item level. And once you get to 125, it starts getting to be item level 20. Additionally, there are some rare recipes that you can buy from vendors, along with some uncommon ones that give you access to a variety of other recipes for the profession. You can choose to take those or not. Some of them you might want to, though. Later down the line, you'll also find recipes from quartermasters for reputations in some of the different zones. I'll talk about that in a minute. So, simply put, professions have a big impact on the server. In fact, I want people to be able to make a lot of items that wind up still being useful down the line. There was something that did not sit right with me about creating, for instance, a blue linen robe and using it for all of 1 or 2 levels and then throwing it away about an hour into the game. And so, you'll also find, while you might replace some items from like eye level 14 to 16, you'll find that items at eye level 16 will have different stat lines entirely. So you might actually want the eye level 14 items because they offer you like haste or spirit instead of critical strike or intellect. You'll also find that some professions have things they don't normally have. One of them being inscription, having access to being able to create staves. Additionally, some of the higher level stuff, like their master's inscriptions, have been moved down to inscription level 150 to kind of strengthen it a bunch. In order to make staves, besides having the ability to make it, one of the key ingredients or regents is a short staff, which you have to buy for 1 gold. Later down the line, once I fully flush it out, we have the logging profession, which you'll be able to use with wood carving. And wood carving will give you access to being able to fletch arrows and arrow shafts, bows, gun stocks, and some of those staves in order to make that item there. I have a lot of that stuff implemented already. I just haven't put the nodes everywhere I want them yet. Let's see. So, one of the features that we have here as well is some level of story progression. Similar to playing on a blizzlike server, you follow the quest line in order to get a bit more of the story out. And by doing this, you open up more areas of the game to play in, some of them being the higher level areas. Over on Vilebranch, you start immediately, once the cinematic is over, in your corresponding beginning hub, such as Sourfang's Landing for the Horde and Area Peak for the Alliance. You'll also notice while playing the game that there have been some world changes, like Stromgarde being opened up as a quest hub and some other parts of the map here. There's also some changes to the zones here. Over in Hinterlands, you have the Great Arena, which is basically where a Gurabashi chest event similar thing will happen, and access to certain raids or dungeons from other zones that have been moved over. One example of this is that Grim Batol in the Wetlands has been opened up and will be one of the 5-man dungeons coming soon. You'll also notice through exploration of these zones that parts of the zones that didn't exist before now do, and lead to different areas of the game. As a result, there are more things to explore and more hubs to open up. The way to do this is by starting out in your quest hub, and I think Horde will wind up going to Silverfang and exploring some interesting things occurring over there. And then you'll wind up going to the Hillsbrad and Arathi. Over in Arathi, you'll have your quest hub in Stromgard, which will feature a new faction. Be one of them that you'll be grinding for professions and some PvE items. Maybe even some PvP stuff, who knows. I think most of the PvP stuff, though, will be behind a arena vendor and cost arena points. Some of the arena items I have planned will feature things like nets that you throw at the enemy that'll dismount them so they can't just easily run away. But besides that, your PvE progression will still be in the form of doing like dungeons and heroic dungeons and then raids, but also through doing quest lines and opening up these areas, allowing you to do quests that'll give you rewards for doing things such as, you know, going to Shadowfang Keep once you've uncovered the story about what's going on in there, or going into Grim Batol once you've completed some of the Wetlands quests, or maybe even Alderman once you've done Lochmadan's quests. Every few quests doing the quest chain, you'll also receive a box of vanity shards. And vanity shards will be able to be exchanged for some aesthetics here in the store. A lot of things in the store will be exchangeable for vanity shards or even just gold. However, there are going to be some features and some things in which you do pay voting points or donor points. Those will be few and far between and have a lot of overlap because you'll be able to purchase vanity shards, and vanity shards will be exchangeable for donor points. I wanted to do this because a lot of people don't like the idea of pay to win, even if it is just for aesthetics. And so I want everything in the game to be earnable by, well, playing the game. Let's see, other design philosophies. Class fantasy, streamlining talents. I think that might be everything. If you guys want to ask me questions or apply for any developer positions, or even just be part of my creative think tank, you can go to the titansleague.org website or go into our Discord and just message me directly. My name is Crow number 0385. Hope you all have a good day, and thank you for watching. Until then, see you soon.